I'm Charlie Redding.
And I'm Claire Fudge.
And this is the Triathlon Podcast.
I was very, very lean, which I thought was great because I looked great. And again, that's kind of a bias that I have to help a lot of athletes with. They conflate aesthetic image with health and performance or even virility.
That was Evan Lynch, and this episode is called Reds in Men. Welcome to another enlightening conversation on the Triathlon Podcast, this time with Evan Lynch, a dedicated nutritionist and educator, as we deep dive into the realm of relative energy deficiency in sport, otherwise known as REDS, in men in particular. We hear a lot about it in women, but not so much about it in men. So Evan's journey in the field of nutrition is testament to his commitment to helping individuals achieve their best selves through the power of proper diet and nutrition. With a profound passion for assisting others in navigating the complexities of personalized nutrition, Evan has established himself as a guiding light for those seeking to improve their relationship with food, optimize athletic performance, or embark on a journey of weight loss. Drawing upon his impressive academic background, Evan's expertise is further enriched by practical experience, having engaged in international track and field himself. This unique blend of academic knowledge and personal insight equips Evan with a deep understanding of the psychological nuances that underlie optimal nutrition. So in this episode, Claire and I got the chance to unravel the intriguing topic of REDS in men, a syndrome that Evan has personally encountered as an athlete and now seeing becoming more prevalent and more widely understood in both athletes and active individuals. So from his background in track and field to his extensive experience in the nutritional science world, Evan can shed light on the intricacies of REDS, exploring its impact on performance, hormonal balance, and our overall long-term health. So I know you're going to really enjoy this interview with Evan Lynch. How would you like to grow your business whilst working less and enjoying your work life more? Well, that's how we help people at the Trusted Team. We do that through workshops, which happen in person and online. We do that through regular online learning that you can just do from your desk at lunchtime. And we do it through in-person events that make fun tax deductible. Things like golf days, dinners, wine tasting, all of that fun stuff. They help you build stronger relationships and enjoy work more. So if you want to know how we can help you grow your business and improve your work-life balance, go to thetrusted.team to find out when our next free taster event or free webinar is, so that you can find out how we can help you grow your business and get your work-life balance back. That's thetrusted.team. Come join us at one of our events.
Are you struggling to manage energy levels at work or during training? Finding it hard to know how to fit in eating for health, sport, and life? Do you want to separate fact from fiction? At Fourth Discipline, we work with leaders, professionals, athletes, and people with medical conditions. We take you on a 6-step science-led journey to manage energy, optimize performance, recover well, and improve health. We offer enhancement clinics for businesses, supportive online workshops, one-to-one coaching, and accountability. If you'd like to have a free call to find out how we can support you, then log on to fourthdiscipline.com and book your call today.
Hi, Evan. Welcome to the Triathlon Podcast. Really looking forward to this conversation, particularly as I feel like I can sit this one out almost. I'm going to sit back and watch the conversation evolve. For those of for the listeners' benefit, I'm actually dialing in from the St Agnes Hotel. I've just had my lovely Cornish breakfast, which I enjoyed very much. And given the conversation that you guys are about to have, I'm glad I've had it before rather than after the conversation, because I'm sure I will have enjoyed it more. But I like kicking these podcasts off by asking a bit about the story. So can you kick things off before I sort of ask Claire to kind of talk. You guys can talk nutrition amongst yourselves, and I'll just act like the idiot in the room, just to pitch in if you get too detailed at any point. But yeah, let's kick things off by understanding a little bit about your background. So how did you get into what you do now professionally, but also you want to tell us the story around your sporting background as well?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for having me on. I always love getting the chance to do podcasts or interviews, things like that. I think more so than ever, it's very important that there are more evidence-based nutrition resources out there. As for what I do, like, I have a reasonably large social media profile. I've seen all the misinformation with my day-to-day work. I hear this misinformation trickle back to me all the time. So I love getting a chance to do stuff like this. How did I end up here? Accidentally, actually. I wanted to be a physiotherapist initially. So I'll rewind a little bit. I did professional track and field. I was a race walker. For those who don't know what that is, that's extremely fast walk, and you can Google it if you want. I made it as far as junior and under 23, competing for Ireland, got to a couple of world championships, a few European championships, and I think I still have one or two national records from underage and junior level. I don't know. I may or may not be looking at making a comeback to the senior track and field scene. We'll see. I have two little kids, so they may not allow me to do that just yet. But from my time as an athlete, you know, you're always trying to optimize what you're doing. I was always naturally curious, so I gravitated towards nutrition, towards the ancillary things you can do outside of your training to promote performance. And when it came time to go to college, I actually didn't get enough points to do physiotherapy in the University of Limerick, so I put down food science and health as a backup. Did it, ended up really liking it, and thought, I wonder if there is such a job as someone who tells athletes how to eat, because I would really like that. And there wasn't a whole lot of opportunities at that time that I could see. So I took the clinical route. I went and studied dietetics in the University of Malta, which is random but interesting. And then I went and did my master's degree in the University of Ulster throughout the pandemic while I was working as a private practice dietitian. To my knowledge, I'm Ireland's youngest private practice dietitian, or private practice owner, I suppose. And I've just gone and hyper specialized in endurance athletes. So the sports background, the clinical background, it's given me the chance to work with a fair chunk of Ireland's national governing bodies, a good chunk of our international track and field athletes. And I have been able to have clients and patients in the last two Olympic Games. So it's been a pretty interesting 8 to 10 years. Definitely never saw it going this way.
Fab. So can you tell us a little bit? So for people that don't know, so my background is as a dietitian and high performance nutritionist as well, but often people ask, well, what's the difference between a nutritionist and a dietitian? And you touched on there doing dietetics in Malta. Could you tell us a little bit about the difference between the two?
Yeah, so as far as I can tell, the key difference is the dietitian, you know, we're specifically trained to help someone with a medical condition, whether that be an eating disorder, whether it be heart disease, whether it be diabetes, IBS, gastro. That's supposed to be the delineation. However, I'm sure you see it too on social media. People very frequently blur that line into the medical field where maybe it's a little bit inappropriate to do so. But that's supposed to be the key difference. It's a regulated profession as well. I'm sure you come across lots of people who say they're nutritionists, but have no, shouldn't say that, I suppose. I'll be politically correct. But the key difference is the area we can work in, the type of people we can work with, and that regulation, that kind of stamp of approval, that there's a certain threshold of knowledge and competence that you have, and you're very much held to that standard, and you're held to that standard of continuously developing. Like I'm absolutely sick of the CORU CPD log. That's our kind of national governing body. Those party credits they're weighing heavily on me at the moment. I have to sneak a few in before October, but it keeps you on your toes. I don't know, do you feel the same?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I think one of those things that you touched on there is that as dietitians we're regulated, and of course there's some really good nutritionists out there who have a degree and master's degrees, but one thing that I always say to people is make sure that you check. So for any of these things, actually, Charlie, your background as a financial planner, we should all be checking someone's qualifications and that they say what they do is actually they're qualified in that area. So I think it's really important that over when people are looking for professional advice, that they are looking in the right places. Where can people look for if they wanted to check out someone's credentials? So if they were looking for like a performance nutritionist or a dietitian, like how would somebody know that they were qualified? Where could they check?
In Ireland anyway, you can go onto INDI, find a dietitian, and you'll find all the private practice dietitians there. You'll see me on it. Weird fact, I'm actually the only lad on that register. There's not a lot of male dietitians in Ireland. I don't know why. But in Ireland, you would check that for private practice dietitians. Otherwise, you'll only come across them in clinical settings. And clearly they have their credentials squared off if they're in a hospital setting. For the context of sports performance, you can check the CENR register. That's the kind of best standard or the seal of approval for sports nutrition. Someone has done a master's degree, or they're a dietitian who specializes in sports, or they're a researcher working in that area. That would be where I would advise someone to look. And in fact, I'm CENR accredited. All of my team are CENR accredited, or dietitians about to be CENR accredited for that very reason.
Yeah, no, excellent. And it's good to know, where to find it, dietitians. And actually in the UK, you can look on the British Dietetic Association website and the HCPC. So that's kind of aligned medical professionals as well. So yeah, it's good to know where to find people. Tell us a little bit about just kind of rolling back a little bit about race walking. So we've had some amazing athletes on, and it's not just triathlon that we touch on, and we've had ultra runners. We've had actually last week we're talking about obstacle racing. So tell us a little bit about race walking, because I don't really know anything about it. So tell us a little bit about what your body composition needs to be like to race walk, because I'm thinking maybe you need to be like a marathon runner. Maybe I'm very wrong, but tell us a little bit about the distances, and because that's now an Olympic sport, how that works.
Yeah, so not many people do it. It's a bit of a fringe one on the athletic scene. Basically, in terms of the body composition you have to have the physiology of a really high level marathon runner, but you have to have the technical coordination of a hurdler. It's a very technical sport. It's the only sport that you can be disqualified from for non-violent reasons, I suppose, in track and field. Basically, the rules are very, very simple. You have to have 2 feet on the ground at all time, or the appearance of 2 feet on the ground at all time, and your front leg has to lock. So it has to be 180 degrees or hyperextended. It happens anyway. If you're ever trying to get into it, lads, and you're curious, would I be a great race walker? Just think of keep your arms at 90 degrees and really drive them, and walking on your heels. And you kind of do it if you think of that. I got into it because my dad did it. I have no idea how he got into it. I just saw a newspaper clipping of him with a national medal when I was 10, and I thought, okay, well, that's obviously what I have to go and do now. In terms of distances for underage, you're looking at anywhere from 2K to 10K. It's the longest event in the World Junior Championships and the World Youth Championships, for example. When you go up to under 23 senior level, then you're doing 20K, and there was a 50K event. It was the longest event in the Olympic Games, but they cut it down to 35. To be honest, I'm not really sure why I'm not in that inner circle anymore. It's been a while since I competed professionally. But a lot of people underestimate the sport. Often it's kind of poked fun at, because the technique is, if you're not in the sport, you could think those guys look a bit funny. Some people suggest that we waddle, or kind of you sway a little bit when you're walking, and it's true. But the mechanics of it and the reality of it, if you ever want to see, would I hack the pace at the front pack of a 20K in the Olympic final? Go onto a treadmill and turn the dial up to 16, 17 kilometers an hour. And that's the speed that you're trucking away at. In terms of the biomechanics of it, the high level race walkers have the same cadence as a 400-meter hurdler for the whole event. Step speed is insane. So bringing it back to what is a race walker, a marathon runner with insane levels of fast twitch fibers and very, very good technical skills. That's
I can imagine how many people are now going to go out there and try it, because I'm just thinking I'm not sure that I could. I'm sure we've all had a go at pretending to race walk, but yeah, interesting. And really interesting that you talk about being like a hurdler as well, because I was thinking marathon runner, but I didn't think about the hurdler sort of aspect of it. And when you were competing under 23s, I'm always interested to find out, you know, in the world of nutrition, it's not new, but actually I think more different sports and coaches now are on board with actually making sure that athletes have the correct nutrition. There is a lot of old school thoughts on nutrition, and certainly there's a lot of old school coaching thoughts that are still, you know, out there. What was it like competing at under 23s? Did you get any nutritional advice? Like, what was it like at that time?
So it's a bit of a bugbear for me, because my career ended prematurely due to what I now see in hindsight was REDS, relative energy deficiency. I had no nutritional oversight, no education on that front of things. My career flamed out when I was in my second year of college. So halfway through a bachelor's degree, not specialized in sports, I really didn't know what I was doing. I tried a low carb diet because a colleague or someone I looked up to said, man, you should try this. And I thought, well, he's better than me at this, and he was in the Olympics. Clearly, he's a fountain of knowledge. So I did that, and I ended up getting very bad injury that I couldn't shake in my lower left limb. I had all of the hallmarks of REDS. I had immunosuppression. I had libido problems. It affected my mental health. It ruined my life actually for about 2 years. And it was hard to watch, because my plan all along was to be in Rio, and I watched it from my couch, which hurt. So my nutritional practices looked something like get up, do fasted training, because I thought that was good. Avoid carbs, because I'd read, I don't know, maybe the Joe Rogan podcast or something like that, and felt maybe I shouldn't be cracking into these carbs here because they're bad. And pretty much I did the opposite of what I would advise someone do now. And I kind of think that's why I got into the role I'm in now. I advocate heavily for REDS and misinformation, because I suffered from it. I am one of the statistics. I should have been an Olympic athlete, but I'm not.
Can I just ask, just because I know we've talked about it once on the podcast before, but can you just explain what REDS is? You've mentioned it a couple of times, so I think it'd be good for an explanation.
Sure. So basically, relative energy deficiency in sport, if you want to think of it in layman's terms, malnutrition for athletes. If you think of an athlete, their absolute caloric output can sometimes be absolutely insane. Like, it's not uncommon for one of my clients or patients to need 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 calories a day. The logistics of eating that are hard. And the most common problem a new client or patient will have is when we actually look at, well, here's where you need to be and here's where you are, that shortfall is huge. And we can stratify someone's risk factors. So you use kind of energy availability. And I'm not going to get too technical into it, but for men and women, there are different, or there's thought to be different cutoff points. So ladies are a little bit more sensitive to lower energy deprivation than lads. The key difference being the energy cost of a reproductive system. And that's why apparently, or superficially anyway, more females suffer from REDS or under eating, because the symptoms become apparent quicker. Think losing your menstrual cycle. That's your key red flag. I'm starting to make social media content on this, and I released a podcast recently on this about REDS in men. For obvious reasons, lads don't talk about these things. Definitely in Ireland, there's a degree of probably ego and embarrassment, but the male version of losing your menstrual cycle is erectile dysfunction or a loss in libido. And I have seen and do work with lads who are under the age of 30, aesthetically look they look the picture. I assume girls think they're brilliant, you know. It'd be a pretty tough thing for them to say, well, actually, I'm having this problem, because it totally emasculates them. So what's taught at the moment is more male athletes do suffer from RED-S than we're aware of, because they're simply too embarrassed to speak about. But to go back and answer your question, what is RED-S? It's a multi-systemic issue. If you're not eating enough, basically it crushes more or less every aspect of your health and your physiology. Key symptoms would be a loss in performance. Your sleep might suffer because you're going to have elevated baseline stress hormones. Basically, the symptom constellation, it's very, very varied. You can go from immunosuppression to stress fractures to infertility to changes in your mental health, or an odd one, and a lot of athletes get this, is changes to gut health and bowel patterns. That's another common symptom as well. So it's an interesting one that we're still learning about. But if you're an athlete and you think, maybe I don't eat enough, there's a 100% chance you don't eat enough, and you should maybe talk to someone about what your calorie requirements are and how you can bump those levels up a little bit to avoid these problems. Because one of the interesting things is you can be in an energy deficit for a while before any issues become apparent, and you can think, well, I'm fine. And then you get that threshold, and it's like being hit by a car. You can't do your training one day, or you don't recover. And when you get it, then it takes a while to shake it off. So you can, the analogy I'd use with a runner, because there's such a low level of inertia to do running or cycling versus, say, a weightlifter, where they have to be able to be 100% all the time. An endurance athlete can kind of run, jog, or cycle through into their own grave if they're not careful.
Mm-hmm. No, and Evan, I think it's really important that you raise there not only personal experiences, but that it is absolutely present in males. And I think, you know, many years ago when we were looking at the female athlete triad, you know, which was the original thinking around this problems with bone health, lack of menstrual cycles, that's now been encompassed into that relative energy deficiency. I think it's really important that men are educated on it. And you're absolutely right. You know, it's easier if women have a natural menstrual cycle to be able to see it. But of course, then there's women on contraceptives, and then you don't see the menstrual cycle losses either. So it's an emerging area, isn't it? And I think there's still some discrepancies, or big discrepancies, about how do we actually measure energy that people are eating. It's such a problem, isn't it? Because it's so many estimations there. In terms of you touched on kind of coming out from the sport that you were doing because of RED-S, is that correct? Or was there an injury and that sort of brought you out of sport?
Yeah, so this was never diagnosed. This is totally self-diagnosis in retrospect. I went to many doctors with low neutrophil counts, iron deficiency, low vitamin D, the recurring injuries, inability to tolerate high intensity work, couldn't get my heart rate up, I couldn't sleep. And to be fair, this was 2014. The consensus on RED-S itself and the incorporation of male physiology, I don't think it happened at that time. It was a couple of months to a year after that. So in a sense, as far as a doctor was concerned, my problem didn't exist, you know. So nobody knew what to say to me, but I was textbook, you know. I had low glycogen availability, low carb intake, long periods of time without food, high energy outputs. I was very, very lean, which I thought was great because I looked great. And again, that's kind of a bias that I have to help a lot of athletes with. You know, they conflate aesthetic image with health and performance, or even virility, and they're very much not the same thing. But yeah, I'm very sure that I was a RED-S case. It's just unfortunate that I was born in 1995 and hit that when I was that age in that time. If it happened now, I'd like to imagine that there would be someone else like me who I could reach out to, who might have shed light on, well, if this is what's going on, someone can help, you know?
No, absolutely. And what do you think, as a clinical dietitian, and I guess this is where some of our skills sit as well, is there's a lot of media attention now on REDS, which is great. It's really raised the profile of education, and also some cases that we've seen in certainly in British sports, where cases of REDS and eating disorders have now sort of come to light with the way that some people are coaching. What are your thoughts on where does REDS stop and an eating disorder begin? Because there are these very blurred lines. There's this continuum, isn't there? And I think some people would feel happier to say I've got REDS than I've got an eating disorder. Could you just tell our listeners like a little bit about, if they were thinking actually sat here now, oh God, that sounds a little bit like me, what's the main difference between those two diagnoses?
So it's definitely, for me anyway, it's probably a bit of a judgment call or a feeling based on how I typically judge it is the intent. What was your intent with this diet? Is it that, were you trying to achieve extreme levels of leanness? Do you have this high kind of drive or preoccupation with being thin? If so, why do you feel like that? And, you know, if someone clearly displays that they're very obsessed with their body image, it makes up a big part of their headspace, and they engage purposely in disordered methods like skipping meals, fasted training, if they have good food, bad food mentality, or rigid thinking, or compensatory mechanisms at times. Like I came across a horrible case not that long ago, a marathon runner whose coach said, you must be X kilos or you're not racing. So she resorted to diuretics and ended up in hospital with hyponatremia. And obviously the whole build up to that, there's this whole fractured body image, a food relationship, total warped view as to what is normal. And I think some athletes don't see their kind of disordered cognitions as a problem, as so many of their coaches or their peers think like that. But just to contrast then, I have had a lot of athletes who underfuel and have had REDS, and it's completely not intentional. They're just actually shocked when I go through the maths, like, buddy, you need to be eating the equivalent of 30 spuds today. Like, you're just not doing that. And they're there scratching their head thinking, oh my God, I did not know this. Generally, it's very clear if it's disordered or not, but you kind of have to delve a little bit deeper. And I'm fortunate here as a private practice dietitian, you can be a little bit on your own, and there can be that pressure or expectation that you're a GP, a psychologist, and a dietitian wrapped into one. But I have a counselor who works with me, and I have sports medicine physicians who I directly refer to. So if there's a hint of anything disordered whatsoever, it's just a straight referral, and we ask them to do their bloods, link in with the sports med physician, and we do the nutritional support on our end. So it's I've never missed one, to my knowledge, an eating disorder, because it becomes clear as you talk, I suppose. But for a listener, I think maybe the easiest way to stratify your risk of having an eating disorder is the intent of your dietary restriction to achieve low body mass levels? Do you think about that a lot, or were you just unaware you had to eat lots?
No, absolutely. Thank you. And I think that hopefully gives listeners a bit of an idea about some of those signs and symptoms of REDS as well. Just thinking along these lines of restriction, race walking, endurance sports, we've talked to lots of different people, and obviously heavily in the media is about low carbohydrate diets. And we have lots of opinions of people that we interview, which is really, really interesting. Just thinking about your background in endurance sport and race walking, when you were doing that, or what are the nutritional strategies for race walking? I appreciate if there's shorter distance now, I've learned, and there's longer distance. I was thinking it was just longer distance. What would the nutritional strategy be like for that? And is there a part of it where you do some glycogen depletion or lower training in a fasted state or a lower carbohydrate state?
So for the 20K, 10K, definitely not. Those guys crack away at just under their anaerobic threshold for most of it. So that's totally glycolytic. For the 50K, you could argue to a degree that getting good at burning fat is an important aspect of this, because you only have a finite amount of glycogen. But maybe it's my personal bias and fear of underfueling people. Insofar as I've read, if you're already a well-trained endurance athlete, your capacity to oxidize fat is already pretty good. And if you can employ carb loading tactics appropriately, whether it be 20K where you're looking for maybe 8 to 10 grams per kg body weight the day before, or the 50 where you're looking for 12, and if you have good pre-tactics and you're able to take on adequate stuff during it, personally, I veer away from doing fasted work, because that low glycogen availability, it does have knock-on effects. You know, with race walkers in particular, they're just one kind of very niche point. With that heel striking, you get a lot of foot strike hemolysis. So these guys really struggle to keep their ferritin count up. So if we look at it from that perspective, we know that fasted work amplifies the hepcidin response to exercise, and it can make it far harder to maintain I suppose balanced iron levels. And from what I've seen, and again my understanding, there's no clear benefit to having an athlete be fat adapted or optimized. And in fact, the supernova study that Louise Burke et al. Did in Australia was done in race walkers, and the outcome was interesting. I'm a nerd, so I obviously thought it was very interesting. I thought it was brilliant. I read it a few times. The athletes, they did it in kind of a randomized crossover method. They put them on high periodized and low carbohydrate approaches. Interestingly, the low carbers had a higher VO2 max, but were on average of 10 to 15% slower. And the outcome from that study was you can be fat adapted and you'll appear to be fitter, but it's just less efficient. So everything I've read to date suggests that you probably don't need to do fat adaptation or glycogen depletion. Maybe if I worked in the Tour de France, my mind would change. But even with any Ironman athlete I work with, and again, it might be my bias towards fear of underfueling or eliciting iron deficiency or stress fractures, but we do no fasted stuff.
No, thank you. And yeah, the for those of you who are listening, the supernova trials, I think Louise Burke is now, she's a researcher and a dietitian actually in Australia, isn't she? I think she's now on number 4. I think she's just done the ketones and low carbohydrates, high fat, isn't she, as well? So for anybody that wants to read those journals, there's also snippets out there really interesting about trials in using fat as a fuel source versus using carbohydrate in endurance sports, and that the background was in race walkers. So really interesting to have a read as well. Just thinking about technology, we've been talking a lot about technology, and Charlie's probably going to dip in a little second because he loves his tech. I also like technology, but we have different thoughts on it. So I'd love to know your thoughts on technology in the nutrition space, what you think maybe is useful, not useful, and whether there's anything that, if you were going to make a product like an AI product or a tech product, is there anything you think the nutrition world of sports nutrition needs?
Personally, and this may not be popular opinion, I think there is possibly slightly too much tech. And I think what it's done is, it'd be like giving an MRI machine to someone with no background in radiography or medicine. CGM is a great example. If you do sports nutrition appropriately and you have your high GI carbs before training, your blood sugar will do that. If you are on a CGM and you see that rising sugar, you think you don't have, I suppose, a clinical nuance to see that, well, that should happen. You can think, oh no, I clearly have type 2 diabetes now. Or you can Google, my blood sugar is 8 millimoles. What does that mean? And it'll tell you all sorts of horrible things. I'll stick on a CGM for a second. I think when healthy non-diabetics use CGMs, it pathologizes daily normal fluctuations in blood sugar, and it makes them possibly carb phobic or overly fixated on something that is really not that important for a normal healthy person. So that's popular opinion number one.
Can I just ask, sorry, Evan, just to explain what a CGM means for those people listening?
Continuous glucose monitor, made initially for people with type 1 diabetes who do need to be able to calculate what their blood sugar is all the time, and thus what insulin requirements they have. In the sports sphere, people are data crazy, so they felt, wouldn't it be brilliant and definitely useful if we can know what our blood sugar is all the time? And I think in research settings, yes, but free living people, I think it's a bit OTT.
Can
I just ask on this? Sorry, just because having just read a book called The Glucose Goddess, I'm just intrigued by the concept of the more glucose or blood sugar spikes we get, the worse the impact is on our long-term health. Could you just talk around that? Because that's one of the reasons why having a glucose monitor would be useful or considered useful.
Yeah, so I suppose it's important to look at this in context. If we're talking about athletic cohorts here, generally we're talking about very well insulin sensitized people who probably are reasonably healthy anyway. So I think glucose spike is probably a dramatization as to what might happen. Like it probably doesn't jump to 11, 12 millimoles. If it does, then you definitely might have a bit of a problem if it's doing that, perhaps. For, let's say, the sports nutrition tactics we would talk about, pre and post exercise, they're not healthy eating guidelines. They don't look like healthy eating guidelines at all. So I think it's very important to contextualize that. If you're looking at a 24-hour day, you're training there, you do sports nutrition guidelines as in low fiber, high GI carbs around that. That is notably not optimal for blood sugar control. The rest of your day would be. So the slight bump in blood sugar before training, where you might get to 6, 7, I would say at most 8 millimoles, is not necessarily pathological. A good analogy, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek one I would use. Lucozade Sport is called Lucozade Sport because it's not designed to be drank while you're sitting on the couch watching television. If you applied sports nutrition guidelines for your whole day, you would 100% be type 2 diabetic or have fatty liver disease, I would say within a month, 2 months, like very easily. Could you imagine eating 30 slices of white bread a day to meet your needs throughout the whole day? That would be a disaster. So I think looking at the timing, the context, the cohort, the actual magnitude of that glucose variability and the actual real impact of that, I think it's important not to over pathologize that. And my clients who have had CGMs, they'll sit in on a session and they'll say, oh, my blood sugar was 7 millimoles. That's above the threshold you see for fasting glucose in a blood test. And it gives them really bad anxiety. Can you explain, well, actually, that's okay. You don't need to worry about it. Your HbA1c or your average blood sugar over the last 3 months was well within the healthy range. You're okay.
I think it's useful, isn't it? To, you talked about things like the CGM in terms of you need to know how to interpret those results. You referred to like an MRI, and actually short uses for education can be quite useful. And I think, Charlie, one of the things that you kind of raised there, actually when you use it in different populations, again, the education behind it would the profile is likely to look very different to an athlete, so they're very different things that we're talking about, I guess, in using a CGM, and I think it can be quite useful actually in people who are not moving very much, not doing very much exercise, and are possibly overeating or living a lifestyle where they're drinking lots of alcohol and eating out a lot, because actually that educational piece on where it is right now and if we make changes. So yeah, absolutely. I think if you've got technology, know what you're going to do with the information. Is there anything else that you use in terms of tech in with nutrition, or anything that you'd like to see invented that would help us?
Yeah, well, I use Nutritics a lot with people in Libro. That's kind of how I track people remotely, and that works pretty well. I'll often transpose that onto someone's training peaks data, or I'll get their power meter. That'll help me to accurately, or kind of accurately, or as accurate as possible, interpret input versus output. And what has been the case for some athletes, if you can use, again, Nutritics, you can get a really detailed breakdown as to someone's daily intake. And sometimes what will happen is an athlete will say, I fell short that day. And you might see that, well, the night before you had basically an omelette. There was no carbs in that. You didn't have the funds to pay for your session that morning, or your calories were slightly down for the 2 or 3 days prior to that. So you can help troubleshoot there by looking at the ins and outs. In terms of what I like to see tech being developed, what is being developed at the moment, what I'm very curious about, is Hexes, the kind of carb periodization for you. That's very, very useful, because it's a question I get asked by clients. I'm sure you're the same all the time. So I think for sports nutrition anyway, I see that as the coolest or most interesting thing that's being developed at the moment. To be honest, I rarely get to spend time delving into the world of tech outside of that. I barely have time to scratch my head these days. So the Hexes, Nutritics, Libro, those are kind of my tools that I would use, I suppose.
I think there's going to be just more and more integration, isn't there? Some of these nutrition apps that are becoming using AI to be able to pick up data from training platforms like Training Peaks or Final Surge or whatever it might be, to be able to say, this is what training you did, therefore this is what carbohydrate you need. So yeah, I think it's really interesting how all of these pieces of technology are now all able to talk to each other. Where do you see, we've talked a lot about AI and then what happens to what happens to professions, and how do we work with it? How do you see, with all of these pieces of AI and these technologies, where do you see now, like a performance nutritionist or dietitian sitting, how can we work with all of these technologies? Because people are wanting to take them on, and will obviously take them on.
I think AI is a fair bit away from having the clinical acuity of a practitioner. I think it's great for giving you general guidance. I don't think it can be clinical or interpret things. I definitely don't think it can interpret things yet. It also isn't necessarily empathic. It's not personable. I would like to think, much like a consultant with a fancy suite of MRI machines, blood work, it'll just kind of add to what we do. I think some people are afraid it'll replace us, kind of like a Terminator doomsday scenario. I don't really see that. I think there's a lot of considerations to make. If a client has a bad day training, it's not automatically down to poor nutrition. And I'm sure you're the same, but when you talk to someone, you can see other things going on. Someone might mention that they're having a tough time, or they're not sleeping great. You open up that line of inquiry. I don't think AI can expand or elaborate bar whatever purpose it's designed. Let's say like the carb periodization, it's not going to ask you how your day was and delve into what are the non-nutritional reasons for this poor performance. And I definitely think, from personal experience, that happens a lot. That's a lot of the conversations we would have where the nutrition appears to be okay. You help them find another answer.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, isn't it, like working alongside all of those pieces of information, and actually that helps us sometimes to do our job and those questioning as well. What we always like to ask is about books that people have been reading. So it might be a book, or maybe it's a podcast. Is there anything that you've been reading recently that you'd like to recommend?
Unless people really like to read research papers, to be honest. How I stay on top of things is I have a Twitter account under a pseudonym, so people don't message me on it. I just see what researchers are cranking out, and I try and stay on top of that. There are a few key researchers I follow: Asker Ukendrup, Louise Burke, James Martin, Samuel Impey. If they release something, I read it. Otherwise, Sigma Nutrition podcast is a very good kind of education. For me, to be honest, I learned an awful lot from that, because again, as a dietitian, you can get anything sitting in front of you. Case in point, I have a client at the moment who is an ultra runner with gastroparesis and cyclical vomiting syndrome. There is no textbook for that.
Yeah.
It's an amalgamation of different sets of clinical guidelines. So alongside the kind of ad hoc reading, a lot of my reading is more or less based on what clients I have. So I'm reading lots into gastroparesis, maybe medium chain triglycerides, to see if we can get around that. And it'll differ from week to week. Like I've had people who've had severe IBS. You have to elicit FODMAP diets, but try and get them very high carb. And that clinical variety is what keeps me on my toes. So again, there's not necessarily a book if you're trying to combine clinical dietetics with sports nutrition, which is more so where I live, as opposed to absolute elite performance. So it can be pretty erratic.
I can clearly there's a lot of noise in this space of what we should eat and what we shouldn't eat, and there's a lot of books on it. Are there any books that you do find yourself recommending to your clients that are a kind of, that you think is a good sort of base learning level that they can go to?
Honestly, not popular. Not really. Like if you really want to learn about sports nutrition, all of the aforementioned people, I think bar Sammy Olympia, have written textbooks on it. If you really want to get into it, you can 100% do that. Otherwise, I mean, you can point people towards educational videos. Like there are some things on YouTube that are educational and evidence-based, or you can try your best to educate in sessions. So I would find that as a sports dietitian, you're almost half a teacher. And that's where a lot of the education would work with for my clients personally. And if anyone does come on board with us, one of the first things we'll say to them is, we wanted that in like 3 to 6 months tops, you never need to talk to me again or anyone like me, because you'll know what to do. So in that sense, I don't really feel the need to recommend books. And again, unpopular opinion, maybe number 4 or 5 today. A lot of books in the nutrition sphere they're kind of self-help books that appear to be nutrition books. I don't think they're actually very helpful, to be honest. Or I think they give generic guidelines because they have to. And for nutrition, it's all context. And you simply can't point someone to a book to say, well, this is your context. All of this is for you and no one else.
I think that's a very valid point, isn't it? Is that you can't have or eat the same thing every single day, the same as somebody else, because our days are so different. We always have a question from the last person that we've had on the podcast. So we have been speaking to an American Olympic triathlete, Katie Zafiris, and she has a question for you. So here goes. What is your most impactful year and why?
My most impactful year, I would have to say it's this year, 2023 thus far. I put a big effort into social media, sharing content, and I've found that through that, it has connected with quite a lot of people. Like, let's say I'll release content on things people struggle with in private but are too embarrassed to talk about, like fecal urgency during exercise, or male athletes with libido, or if you're not able to sleep at night as an athlete, maybe that's an underfueling thing. Perhaps it could be if you check box A, B, and C. So how would I kind of summarize this? Advocating for evidence-based sports nutrition in a public way has enabled me to connect with and thus help people either on a one-to-one basis, or they've read the message and said, I need to get this looked at. And I do get messages all the time, or the podcast even, we pick kind of niche topics and people say it does help them. So yeah, it would have to be this year. I'm on a kind of natural curve anyway. Like, I'm lucky to be in the position that my own business and practice is growing. I've taken on 4 people this year. So the larger we are, the bigger of an impact we can have. The thing I'm most proud of is, I should figure out how to phrase this well. I find that male athletes are not well advocated for. And it's kind of, it's the opposite in every other setting from what I can see. You know, generally speaking, there's always a fight for equality between men and women in sports nutrition with respect to REDs. As a male dietitian who had it, coming from a professional sports background, specializing in this area, that is the thing that I've been able to help people the most with. And you see it, like, I mean, when these guys call me or you're sitting with them first, they're trying to work up the courage to say things downstairs don't work and no one knows why. And you talk to them and they go through all the things they're doing, the underfueling, all that jazz. And that's been a big thing in 2023. And for maybe people don't know, maybe people laugh at ED because historically it's joked about, but low testosterone levels in lads is not a benign thing. That can cause low bone mineral density, infertility. Imagine if you're trying to have kids and your sperm count is too low and you're not aware that it's because you do too much fasted training or you skip carbs. Like, that might never get picked up in a GP surgery. So that has been my most impactful thing, deciding to advocate for that one thing specifically.
So like impact on you and your own business, but also impact on other people as well. Fantastic. And just really to sort of wind things up today from this fantastic conversation with you, we've also got one last question, and we ask our listeners to send a question in, and they don't know who we're going to interview, so it could be anything. So we've got a question here from one of our listeners, Kerry, and she said, what belief do you hold that most people disagree with you on?
No one can, maybe I should rephrase this. Everything is up to you. That's
fantastic.
There are tools there to help you. People will wish you well. And this came about after my athletics career fell apart and the athletics world moved on very quickly without me. There were very few helping hands. And it was a very lonely realization that if I ever want anything, it's totally up to me. I can reach out for help, but it's up to me. A lot of people maybe have a narrative that they've spun that when my circumstance is difficult, or I have many excuses. And generally I find excuses are valid, but it was still a very lonely place, put my head on a pillow thinking, well, none of this worked out, even though I had lots of valid excuses. You still end up in the same place. So that mentality, it makes me very hardworking and fairly unrelenting. And some people maybe think it's a bit of an oversimplistic look at things, that, things don't work out or things are out of your control, but I choose not to let them be, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like actually a very sensible piece of advice as well. Well, Evan, it's been amazing to speak to you, and thank you for sharing all of your information about you and your sport, and also your career to date, and all the insights and all the technical and more nerdy bits. So hopefully our listeners have had a lot to think about, and you never know, they might be going out there and reading some journal papers rather than a book this week. So thanks very much, Evan.
Always my pleasure, guys.
Thank you, Evan. It was really fascinating, and there's a lot of background noise going on here, so it was absolutely brilliant. But I was very glad to sit and listen to the expert speak about this subject. So thank you very much.
Cheers.
If you want to find out more about Evan, then you can find him on Instagram, and he is E Lynch, and that's Lynch Fit Nut. So elynchfitnut on Instagram. He's also on LinkedIn, and his website is evanlynchfitnut.com. We'll put all of those links in the show notes as always. If you like what we do at the Tribathlon podcast, you've got to register for Tribe Talk. It's an email that comes out every 2 weeks, packed full of everything to do with swim, bike and run, but also nutritional help, business coaching and a whole lot more. Whether that's books, videos, TED Talks, apps or technologies, it's packed full of ideas that can help improve your sport, your life and your business. So register for it at tribathlon.com and you'll be sure that every 2 weeks your inbox is full of some amazing ideas and resources to improve your life. And remember, this episode was brought to you by the Trusted Team and by Fourth Discipline. So if you want to find out more about how the Trusted Team can help you grow your business and improve your work-life balance, go to thetrusted.team. And if you want to find out more about how Fourth Discipline can help take your performance in sport and life to the next level, go to fourthdiscipline.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do review it and share it, because it helps other people find what we think is really valuable learning lessons from amazing athletes. So please do that. You can also find the whole back catalogue at tribathlon.com, and you can also find out about the Tribathlon app, which helps people find events, find people to train with and enjoy their events through their tribe. So check out tribathlon.com.